Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of The Power You Have. I'm your host, Pramila Jayapal, and I am here today to talk to you about how you can find and build and, most importantly, use the power you have. I started this podcast to help all of us, with the help of some amazing guests, think about how to tap into our own power in this critical moment, a moment where our country is increasingly and frighteningly controlled by a few greedy corporations and the wealthiest billionaires and leaders who are increasingly turning to authoritarian ways. Now, I know it can sometimes be hard to have hope in the face of the immense cruelty that we're facing, and to even think that your voice and your actions matter. But the thing to remember every single day is that hopelessness and powerlessness are the tools of the oppressor. The people in power want us to think that we have no agency, but it is not true. Every one of us matters, and every one of us can be a part of meaningful change. We just have to act. So I hope that the conversations that we have here on this podcast inspire you to use your voice and your actions to lead in whatever way resonates with you, and that together we build a more powerful movement. I get to have some pretty amazing guests on this show, and today is no exception. Today, my guest is going to be the incredible writer, travel maven, activist, Rick Steves. And we're going to be talking about everything from U.S. foreign assistance around the world to some of Rick's summer travel tips. I'm just so fortunate to call Rick a friend and to have him right here in my region and to have watched him leading some amazing change on critical issues for decades. Now, before we get to Rick, I'm going to do what I always do, and I'm going to start us off with some thoughts about America's role in the world, what the Trump administration has been doing to our foreign assistance programs, the reshaping of the global power structure, and why any of it even matters to people right here at home. As it happens, I just came back from a trip to Ireland, where I joined the Galway International Arts Festival for a conversation on the current state of politics in the U.S. under Trump 2.0. I was interviewed by Fintan O'Toole. He's one of Ireland's best-known journalists and writers who has also covered the United States for decades and writes for the New York Review of Books. It was just amazing to be in Ireland. There's such a wonderful, knowledgeable audience there. There are such close ties between the Irish and people in the United States. And people care deeply about world affairs and humanity. Everyone wanted to know about how the U.S. could possibly be cutting all of our assistance to USAID, abandoning science and research funding that's important to the entire world, abandoning and attacking the United Nations, starting and continuing wars around the world, and attacking immigration of all kinds. They wanted to talk about Gaza as well, Ireland being one of the 147 countries around the world that has recognized Palestine as a state. And they wanted to talk about how to end the genocide that is happening there and the United States' complicity in that genocide. Being in Ireland was just such a clear reminder to me of how important the United States is to the rest of the world and how we shape and define so much policy that matters. How our retraction of aid and from all of these incredibly important multilateral institutions have hurt our global standing and leadership in the world, in addition to leaving more death and destruction in key places that need our support. Now, I'm going to say that everywhere I went in Ireland, there were Palestinian flags flying. It was so moving to see the incredible support for Palestinians and for Gaza and for peace in the Middle East for both Jewish people and Palestinian people. And it was a reminder of how isolated America has become on this issue. We are seeing a truly horrifying situation where more than 60,000 Palestinians have been killed and nearly 150,000 have been injured. And we're seeing further tragedy with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid distribution sites, which are U.S. and Israel backed, where more than 800 people have been killed just trying to access food. What the Israeli government is doing in Gaza is a genocide. And I say that having researched this, listened to the wisdom of Israeli and Jewish American experts on the Holocaust and on genocide, who are increasingly themselves naming this as a genocide. And also, I say this understanding the tremendous pain that this word may cause to many of my Jewish constituents and friends and allies. But I do believe that it's critically important to name the severity of the situation, call it what it is, so that we can change U.S. policy and our complicity in this horrific war. Now, at the same time, we've got to make sure we continue to stand up against anti-Semitism and work toward a lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians. Both with Gaza and beyond, this is a moment of tremendous moral consequence, one where inconsistent U.S. leadership on the global stage could prove to cost even more lives. Our foreign aid cuts, the dissolving of USAID, and the infrastructure we had built around global health, vaccines, disease prevention, humanitarian assistance, they've all collapsed. Just imagine this. More than 60,000 metric tons of food have languished in warehouses in the U.S. and around the world, with at least 15,000 pounds worth of that food destroyed because the food expired. And by the way, much more is about to expire and be destroyed. Trump has started these incredibly reckless and indiscriminate trade wars with countries around the globe, including our closest allies. And as a result of all of this, not only has U.S. favorability in the world fallen dramatically, it has created an opening for China to completely rewrite the story. Where Trump has cut foreign assistance, China has increased theirs, now surpassing American investments in 40 more countries. China will now operate 16 more diplomatic posts abroad than the United States because we have cut so many of our diplomatic missions. And if Trump's budget is enacted into law and the United States fails to pay its contributions to the UN, China would become the biggest contributor to the UN budget and to UN peacekeeping operations. Now, I recently questioned a number of Trump's top State Department appointees in official interviews on the Foreign Affairs Committee where I sit, and I was absolutely stunned at the incompetence, the inability to answer basic questions, and the lack of care for the destruction that we've caused, including with outrageous firings of State Department employees, often, by the way, bilingual or multilingual civil servants who have spent their careers understanding countries and peoples and relationships, working in war-torn parts of the world, and building America's credibility. This destruction will be very difficult to rebuild because of the tremendous loss of talent. For Trump and Republicans, it just seems like making America great again just means ceding our global leadership in the world and letting people die. One example is PEPFAR. This is an AIDS relief program that was started in 2003. It saved 26 million lives. It's enabled 7.8 million babies to be born without HIV infection. Trump is claiming that he's protecting this program, but this incredibly effective, formerly bipartisan program has been absolutely reeling from all these foreign aid cuts. In Uganda, the Ugandan Ministry of Health has said that they're going to have to close every dedicated HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis clinic without PEPFAR funding. And Uganda is home to over 1.6 million refugees, the most of any country in Africa. So it's not just Ugandans who are going to suffer. It's people seeking safety from war-torn countries. And this is going to have a domino effect on regional partners and on Americans as people around the world are forced to leave and seek other countries for safety. In Bangladesh, a country prone to monsoons and mudslides, the cuts in U.S. assistance have meant that programs that were actually helping to reinforce hillsides and build stronger homes and raise awareness about preparation, all those programs have been dismantled. Now, people might think that cutting this funding is going to balance our budget, but it's just not true. In reality, we spend less than a fraction of a percentage of our budget on international aid. And all the time, I'll have people say to me that we spend too much on foreign assistance. And I'll say, listen, I'll make you a deal, okay? You tell me what percentage of our budget you think we spend, and then you tell me what you think we should spend. And without even hearing your answers, I'm going to accept whatever percentage you tell me that we should spend. So you know what they tell me? They tell me that they think we spend 20% of our budget on foreign assistance. And then they say, I'd be happy if you spent 10%. And I'm like, great, I'll take it. 10% is 10 times more than what we spend right now, which is less than 1%. Now, the average taxpayer spent just a little bit of money on USAID, 18 cents per day to fund USAID. And that little bit of money saved over 90 million lives and prevented outbreaks that would have threatened Americans' lives. I've worked and lived all over the world, and I've seen firsthand the power and the goodwill that the United States builds by the work that we do in other countries. Before coming to Congress, I spent many years working for a Seattle-based global health nonprofit organization that employs hundreds of people in my district as well as around the world. Many of our partners and our projects were USAID funded, and I saw the direct impact of that life-saving work in villages and countries around the globe. I worked with women in places like Nepal and Gambia to expand access to contraception and to connect women with health care. And I've also visited so many countries across Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America prior to coming to Congress, as well as in my role in Congress. So what I know is that what we do in the United States matters. We can influence global opinion in good ways or in bad ways. We can save lives or we can let people die. We can prevent communicable diseases from traveling across borders or put others and Americans' lives at risk when we don't. When we empower people with U.S. assistance, they live longer, they live better, they live healthier lives. And that strength and global leadership keeps us safe on the world stage. It gives us more credibility and the ability to step in when other countries need to be held accountable on critical human rights or economic issues. Our relationships with the world really do matter, globally and individually. And no one knows that more than the people who travel. So, it's a perfect time to bring in my guest, the incredible Rick Steves, who has spent his life and his career making the world a more accessible place. Rick Steves is America's most respected authority on European travel, and he's helped millions of Americans discover countries across Europe and explore issues around the world in a way that is fun, affordable, culturally broadening. He is the author of a best-selling guidebook series. He's the host of a popular public television show and weekly radio show, and a syndicated travel columnist. He's also the author of Travel as a Political Act, a book that shows us how travel can help to shape political activism and social understanding. Please welcome Rick Steves to The Power You Have. Rick Steves, thank you so much for being my guest on The Power You Have. You are, such a legend in the world of travel. And in the past, you have said that travel is a political act. At least it is for you. And so tell us how. What do Americans gain and learn from traveling more?
Well, the question is, what can Americans gain from traveling more? You could take all the time and money and go to Cancun for the rest of your life and learn nothing. And for a lot of people, that is travel. I'm going to Disneyland, I'm going to Cancun, I'm going to Mazatlan, I'm going to Vegas, go back to Disney World. My mission with my 100 colleagues here in Edmonds is equip and inspire Americans to venture beyond Orlando.
I love that.
That's what I want to do. And when I first started teaching, it was just, let's all go out to Europe and have fun. Well, fun's great, and I love to be on vacation and have fun, but you can also learn and broaden your perspective. And I find that you learn a lot about your own home by leaving it and looking at it from a distance. And I've been giving this a lot of thought lately because I spend so much time on the road giving talks. And my own passion for teaching travel has evolved over the years. And I see that there are three kinds of travelers. Fundamentally, there are tourists, travelers, and pilgrims.
Mm.
And the tourist sees the road as a playground. The traveler sees the road as school, and the pilgrim sees the road as church or
Mm.
synagogue or mosque.
Mm.
And you don't need to be a monk and you don't need to be a bon vivant playboy, but you can mix it all up. And that's the fun thing. And it's much more rewarding to come home with that dual citizenship, which is a heightened appreciation of what it means and what a blessing it is to be an American, and also an awareness that we are citizens of this beautiful planet of ours. And that's making travel a political act, because then you bring home that global citizenship. And if you're a thoughtful person, you take it into the voting booth with you. And rather than voting for simply, am I better off than I was 4 years ago? That used to be the litmus test for do I vote for somebody? Am I better off than I was 4 years ago? That's not a very thoughtful person who just votes selfishly in the privacy of the voting booth. And I don't think there's any correlation between how big the cross is that hangs around your neck or the flag on your lapel and how you vote in the voting booth. I have this quirky notion that whoever wins this election will impact people south of the border far more than it impacts
Mm.
me.
Mm.
And I vote with that in mind as well as me and my family. And that's just the more sophisticated voter. I think that's the more, if a person is a person of faith, regardless of their faith, I think they embrace this idea of love your neighbor. You can take that into the voting booth with you. And if you're a traveler, you believe, if you're a person of faith, you believe in a God. And if you're a traveler, you're keenly tuned into the fact that everybody is children of that God.
Mm.
And we're all brothers and sisters. We're all just as precious and deserving. And when you travel, you get to know your family. And all of a sudden, love thy neighbor has nothing to do with proximity.
Oh, I love
Nothing to do
that.
with proximity. You
Right.
mean suffering across the street is as real as suffering across or suffering across the sea is just as real as suffering across the street? Yeah, it is. So you become burdened with what Thomas Jefferson mentioned. He said, travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. You're
Mm.
burdened with these issues.
Mm.
And I don't want to go to my grave with just a barbecue apron on and a lot of Budweiser beer images of my life. I want to go to finish my life off knowing that I was a engaged citizen of this planet and did what I could to make it a better place for my children and for people all over this world.
That is so beautiful. And I love your talking about the different kinds of travelers and pilgrims in that context and how it relates even back to democracy and voting. We've been dealing with so much disaster and catastrophe in Congress, as you know. And I want to talk about some of the recent cuts there's so many cuts we could talk about, but I want to talk about some of the recent cuts to public broadcasting. Just last week, following Trump and Republicans' rescissions package that clawed back billions of dollars of funds that Congress had already approved, which, by the way, I keep reminding people, Congress is the only entity that actually has the ability to approve funds. But despite that, the rescissions package rescinded all the money for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That was about $1 billion. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which ensures that people across America, no matter where you live, have access to local radio stations, TV stations. This entire corporation announced that it's going to shut down in about 6 months. You are somebody that has a PBS show. You obviously know the inner workings and importance of public broadcasting, and your show and your knowledge about travel and about the pilgrims who are traveling around the world and the nearness of people from any continent to all of us here. You understand that so deeply. How do you see the impacts that this is going to have on Americans and on our democracy?
Well, our president sees everything in a transactional way. He can't understand a person like me who dedicates their life to inspiring people to get out there and recognize the beauty of the diversity in our world and the fragility of our environment and the importance of economic justice for stability. even if you don't care about love thy neighbor, stability. It's a selfish
Yeah.
thing to invest in economic stability around the world.
Right.
And uh, I've never charged for my TV show. I mean, I make money with my business, but my TV show is, I give it to public broadcasting. Public broadcasting gives caring, mission-driven people that have something special to offer a platform.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Without sounding immodest, Japan recognizes people like this and calls them living national treasures. And it
Wow.
makes sure that they can do their work and contribute without economic stress because they have a lot to give. Um, on the other hand, the Soviet Union used to recognize these kind of people and turn them into janitors in Siberia
Mm-hmm.
instead of a great playwright or a great advocate for the environment or a great musician or a philosopher. So, what kind of society do we want to have? I believe we can have plenty of great commercial broadcast, content. I like Netflix as much as the next person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do believe it's important for society to have this one little oasis on the dial that respects people's intelligence, that assumes an attention span, and is driven not by a passion for keeping advertisers happy, but by a passion for just inspiring people to reach out there and celebrate the world in all of its beauty and live life to the fullest. We do things in public broadcasting that would not be possible in the commercial arena. Now, what happens when we zero out the Corporation for Public Broadcasting? Well, you're cutting $1.60 a year per citizen.
Say that again, because I just want people to really understand how much we pay for public
Cutting
broadcasting.
$1.60 per year per citizen.
Right.
Think about that. For the luxury of the richest country on the planet to have one little thoughtful oasis in the commercial environment. Media shapes our young minds. Media lets an electorate make a proper choice. Media makes a society more effective, more compassionate, more practical, more efficient. And any together nation, Britain has BBC.
Yeah.
Germany has national broadcasting. Norway has national broadcasting. When you buy a TV and you take it home, you don't get pledge drives. You plug it in, and when you plug it in, you get a TV tax.
Right.
Far more than whatever we would do because we just don't believe in that kind of collective funding of things. We like to let it be at a fundraiser,
Yeah.
so we don't, so wealthy people don't have to do their share, and those who have a big heart and some extra money do more than their share. That's fine. That's the American way. But there was just a little bit of help. This $1.60 a year for Corporation of Public Broadcasting, it's not going to hurt Seattle.
Yeah.
It's not going to hurt Portland or San Francisco or LA or Houston. It's going to hurt Aberdeen. It's going to hurt, Chehalis. It's going to hurt
All the small towns across the United States. Yeah.
This is where the most frustration is. And then I've been thinking a lot how sad it is that there are what's called food deserts in the map of the United States, where you certainly can't go to a healthy grocery store, but you can go to just a grocery store in most places. But there are a lot of places where you got to buy your food at a mini market,
Yeah.
at a 7-Eleven, or at a gas station mini market. And it's just for people that don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of education, and they just will live on Twinkies and sugary cereal and call it tasty. That's a food desert. Well, what we're going to have now is media deserts, and it's going to be the same real estate.
Yeah.
So these are the people that are the frustrated, usually a lot of times angry people that become the base of a charismatic autocrat that wants to derail the whole thing, blow the whole thing up, and get these people riled up, and then take power and ignore the checks and balances and the rule of law, and ultimately betray all of these people to make the elites even wealthier and more powerful than they were. That's
right.
the dynamic that's going on right now. It's much more complicated than a bumper sticker, so it's hard for most people to sit down and think about all of that. They just think, oh, my eggs cost $2 each now. I'm going to throw a grenade in the whole thing and start over.
Yeah.
So that's what frustrates me. But by defunding public broadcasting, again, it's just going to hurt the rural areas, the little stations, and it's another example of how this country, the richest country in the history of humanity, cannot afford the basic nice points about a society that were a slam dunk and not a partisan issue when I was a kid. I just led a campaign in Edmonds here to help fund music in the middle schools. I can't believe
Nice.
it takes some citizen that's got a few extra bucks to rally a few other people and
Yeah.
pay for a band. I had band when I was a kid, and it was like it was
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about trickle down, Pramila, and what I see the biggest trickle down, of course, doesn't work in the standard way Republicans use it as an excuse to give rich people tax breaks because they create employment and it all trickles down. That's been proven wrong ever since Ronald Reagan. But what is trickle down is the heartache when you
Yeah.
wring a society for money to give to your billionaires and you pay for it by people who can't afford their health care and they can't afford education and they can't afford to have a solid reliable retirement. We are wringing everything out of the lower echelons of our
That's right.
society in little bits at a time. Public broadcasting, $400 million a year for $1 trillion tax cut. People don't even know what $1 trillion is, but
Yeah.
it's 1,000 billion, and
Yeah.
people don't even know what $1 billion is. It's 1,000 million,
Well,
you
that's
know.
right. I mean, the big bad betrayal bill was a $5 trillion tax cut for the wealthiest billionaires, and here we are talking about pennies that go to support, rural and urban. But you're right that the rural stations are the ones that are really going to shut down. And this is the same dynamic with USAID because I used to work in global public health, and you've traveled almost everywhere. You know how important it is when America uses our dollars for what we call soft power, right? We help people
Oh.
with vaccines, with public health, with all kinds of things that are really important for people to be able to see that the richest country in the history of the world is also understands that we are interlinked and interconnected with the well-being of other countries. And so the cuts that are happening right now to USAID, to foreign assistance more broadly, getting rid of diplomatic missions around the world, in your view, having traveled all over and seeing the reaction that people have to Americans, what does it do to our standing in the world as Americans? Because I'll tell you, I just came back from Ireland, and they were telling me that they're seeing a lot fewer Americans, and that they have heard from some people that part of it is people are afraid to go to the rest of the world because they see that America has just been such a bully and pulled out of so many of our commitments to to so much of world peace and prosperity and justice.
Well, let's talk about that later because that's a very important issue. But I want to talk about the impact that this has on American travelers. But first of all, the logic of zeroing out, not cutting back,
Yeah.
zeroing out USAID. You know more about this than I do, of course, but my understanding is all of our soft power is, in other words, investing in economic justice outside of our borders so the world is a more stable place and the brand of America goes up instead of down and less people are trying to get over our walls and trying to get into our country. All of our soft power is USAID, and that's about 400 billion, no, 400, yeah, I think it was $400 billion total. The total budget. Our
It's less
military
than
budget, our
less than
hard power.
1%, less than 1% of all of our total budget is spent on foreign assistance. So
And
it's a very small amount of money for a huge amount of results.
the $1 trillion a year we spend on hard power is designed to make us safer because that's our defense budget.
Right.
And I would propose that we need hard power. We need bombs and fancy weaponry, but we need to analyze every dollar we spend and see which investment makes us safer. And right now we have zero in soft power and more in hard power. And if we just had 5% of what we spend in hard power in soft power, I would bet that 5% would make us 4 times as safe per dollar spent than more weapons. Because
Yeah,
yes, you need weapons,
exactly.
but there's a diminishing curve of returns for those. And right now, the brand of America is in the toilet. And the impact of pulling back on this USAID money. USAID money is not direct charity. It goes via the United Nations World Food Program to support effective, hardworking NGOs non-governmental organizations that are doing good work and are proven. It doesn't go just to governments and corrupt forces. It empowers people in the trenches to make a difference. And I've been there. I produced a 1 hour TV show called Hunger and Hope, Lessons Learned in
That's right.
Ethiopia and Guatemala. And I did a scouting trip. All my life, I've been tuned into this in my teaching and my travels. And it was such a thrill and a gratifying thing to learn about why is there hunger in such a wealthy world, and what is structural poverty, and what does the United States have to do with it, and what's the new effective development aid compared to the old, oftentimes well-meaning but ineffective development aid. Don't condemn today's development aid on your grandmother's development aid, which
Right.
was very simplistic and easy to criticize. Today's development aid, which is all about empowering women and empowering local ownership, and giving climate smart agriculture. There's so many inspiring triumphs in the effectiveness of development aid. I know it takes $1 million, Pramila, to keep an active soldier in action overseas, and that can be a good investment. But we got to remember that for the cost of one incremental soldier, we could drill 100 wells in 100 thirsty communities.
Right.
And all the mothers that have to abandon their children every morning to walk 3 or 4 hours to get water could stay home and take care of their kids. And rather than walking across the county to get their water, they would walk across the square. And when they pumped that water, made with a $5,000 investment from the United States of America, 5,000 bucks, every mom in that village, when they pumped that water, what would they think? God bless America.
America.
God
Exactly.
bless America.
Exactly. I mean,
Their
you hear
kids
this
are
from
healthy.
from folks who are in refugee camps, and including my colleague Ilhan Omar talks about how she would see the American trucks that were coming to deliver aid to the refugee camps, and that's what she would think. God bless America. It's really it's such a big investment, not only in compassion and moral decency, but also in American self-interest, right? Because if we can,
You hit it.
if
That's so important. It's not just love your neighbor. There are people
no,
that in the voting booth, they could care less about their neighbor, to be honest. This makes our world more stable, and it is a practical investment in stability, which I just had breakfast with General Petraeus. I was down at an event,
yeah,
and I asked him about this very thing. And he agrees with so many military experienced leaders that when you cut smart development aid, you have to allocate more money in the military for the problems that that's going to
that's
result
right.
in.
That's right. Exactly
It's a
right. Well,
practical, heartless investment if you don't have a heart, and
yeah,
it's also the right thing to do.
it's also
But
the right
now
thing to do.
we've completely zeroed out our soft power. That means no. That means Voice of America is gone. What's that going to leave? It's not going to leave a vacuum. It's going to leave Voice of China.
Yeah,
You know, these are just practical investments in a world where the ideals of America can be engaged
yeah,
and spoken up for. And
yeah,
when we cower behind walls and pull back from the world, all of the ideals, and that's what makes America great, ideals,
yeah.
all of these American ideals that have inspired democracies all over this planet will be abandoned. And if we're not at the table, they're going to be bulldozed away. And that's the opposite of making America great. People are shell shocked by the betrayal of America on the other 96% of humanity when people thought we cared about these
That's
ideals.
right.
We don't. Everything's a transaction, and
Yeah,
we're building walls instead of bridges. And if you travel, and if you're a thoughtful public leader or whatever, you know that if you want to be safe, the last thing you want is walls. You want bridges. You want to be engaged in the world.
yeah,
And this is kind of one of the souvenirs of travel when you make
yeah.
travel a political act.
Well, I have one more kind of deeper question for you. We don't have enough time to talk about it, and then I want to get to some fun travel tips for people. But in May, you said in an interview that Trump is consolidating power and taking from a fascist autocrat's playbook, and certainly. That is something that we are seeing every day. And having been to many countries that have fought back against fascism, what lessons can you give to our listeners about how to fight back against that. What can people do? This podcast is called "Use the Power You Have," and so we're trying to help people be inspired about what an average citizen can do to fight back against authoritarians and dictators. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one. I think we have to recognize what's happening in our society, first of all.
Yeah,
I, there's all this distraction. Twinkle, twinkle. Let's call the Gulf of Mexico Gulf of America, and let's pave the Rose Garden, and let's make a big ballroom, and let's call them the Washington Indians again, or whatever. This is all not silly, calculated distractions.
that's right.
When the real work, redesigning our democracy is going on.
Mm-hmm.
I researched and wrote and produced a 1 hour special on fascism in 2018.
Yeah.
And it's probably my most widely aired show out of 150 shows I've done in the last 25 years on public television, because there's real appetite for what are the lessons we can learn from European fascism back 100 years ago, when half of Europe was ruled by fascist leaders, all, by the way, who were elected and then read from a playbook of how to derail your democracy. It's the same playbook Erdogan, Orban,
That's
Trump
right.
are
Exactly the
today.
same. Mm-hmm.
And let me just give a plug to this show. You can watch any show I've ever made on the PBS app. If you are a supporting member of public television, it's all there. I just watched one of them last night because I was curious about where I'm going to be going next month. I wanted to watch my show on the Cinque Terre. But all of my specials, the one on hunger and hope, lessons learned in Ethiopia and Guatemala, and my fascism show, and my show on Iran, and my show on Palestine and Israel, all very, very poignant and pertinent and up to date. You can watch them on my website for free anytime. Any show I've ever made without any ads, they're all right there. You just go to ricksteves.com into the TV section. But that fascism show, Pramila, it is a recognition that there's a playbook for wannabe autocrats. Every time I read the news, it just affirms my notion that somebody at Project 2025 headquarters is just reading out of the same playbook that Mussolini read out of.
It is
And that
very much that. Yes.
You know, I was just in Turkey, in Istanbul, and there were 1 million people demonstrating in the street, Pramila, in Istanbul last month, because their buddy of Trump, who so inspires our president, Erdogan, he decided to arrest the Gavin Newsom of Turkey. That's the democracy, struggling democracy of 70 million people, I think. And they put him in jail. He's the mayor of Istanbul, the only guy with the political support and charisma that could possibly stand up against Erdogan in a national election. What did Erdogan do? Lock him up, just like our president.
That's what they're doing right now.
Lock him up, lock him up. What
Already
did Hitler do?
indicted a member of Congress just for doing her job and going to, do oversight of a detention center. I mean, this is stuff that's happening right now.
People don't realize it, but the first inmates in Hitler's concentration camps were not Jews. They were Congress people. They were the Adam Kinzingers, the Mitt Romneys, the Pramila Jayapals, the Nancy Pelosi's of that society. They were household words, committed to democracy, and Hitler had these secret camps where people could just be disappeared, and that was the end of them. When you go to Berlin, in front of their national parliament building, like our Capitol building, there's a very poignant memorial with 50 slate slabs, each with the name of one of these Congress people on it. And when they went to the concentration camp, what concentration camp, and when they died. And Hitler, I don't use the word dickish very often, but there are certain cases when dickish applies. The dickish thing about arresting a politician and putting him in a concentration camp is to keep them alive in solitary confinement for 12 years until you know you're going to lose the war. And then at the very end, each one of these politicians were killed. When Trump makes his wild, wacky statements about alligator Alcatraz and so on, it seems playful. It seems it couldn't happen here. But for the last years, I've been noticing it's all out of the playbook. You've got to tell big lies with repetition and confidence until people start believing it. You've got to capitalize on people's homelessness and anger and fear and racism and create an angry base. And then you have all of these huge rallies. You got to have scapegoats, whether they're Jews or immigrants. You got to offer simple solutions to complex problems. You got to discredit your institutions. You call it the deep state. Who would ever be in favor of the deep state?
Well,
Scandinavia
it's
has
why the knowledge piece is so important, right? I mean, and so I
all
think
of it.
that's a great tip for our listeners to, if they want to be able to fight back against this, to be able to get the knowledge about what is actually happening in order to take action. They're telling me I've only got a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure I get to a couple of fun things because you are
Okay,
such a fun man. Yeah.
before we get into the fun, and we can stretch this. Come on, it's a podcast. Um, this is so fun to talk to you. Solidarity. I've talked at a few
Yes.
rallies. I've
Yes.
never, I've always thought of solidarity in terms of Lech Walesa with the dock workers in Poland as they brought down the Soviet Union, or people, downtrodden peasant farmers in Central America against corrupt governments. Solidarity is something we need now
Yes.
because Trump is banking on a lack of solidarity. So one university can be shut down because nobody will come to their aid, and then one network will be shut down, and one politician will be intimidated into this, and one late night comedian will be in this. And we need to be in solidarity with all of us, or we're going to learn a hard lesson the hard way, and it's hard to get it back. Okay, the fun stuff.
Well, no, I have to say something back because solidarity is so important. This is why we have to have a long, long conversation, or maybe a whole series of them. But I do think that's a really important thing. And some of the most inspiring stuff that I've seen has been, neighbors standing up for people who are being kidnapped and disappeared by ICE on the streets. And so thank you for raising solidarity. Okay, now for the fun stuff. So it's summer. Lots of people are going on vacation. I know you get this all the time, but I'm going to ask you some rapid fire traveling questions. Okay, so you ready? I've just got a few of them.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay. What's the last place you traveled to, and why did you like it?
I was just in London making my TV show, updating a show I made 15 years ago and looking for something new to report on. And the new thing there is regeneration.
Oh, I
That's
love that.
taking industrial wastelands and revitalizing them and mixing in residential with modern commerce and infrastructure. And I've got a 1 hour TV show in London coming up, and it's half of it is about regeneration. It's
Oh, that's
exciting.
so great. That's wonderful. We did a few hearings on that in Congress, actually. Okay, second question. Where are you going next, and why are you excited about it?
I only usually do two. I usually spend 100 days a year in Europe. I've done that ever since I was a kid. This year, for a number of reasons, I've had to do 4 trips to Europe, and I've done
Wow.
3 trips that are filming and guidebook research, and working on our tour program. And now my 4th trip and last trip of the year is coming up, and it's going to be total vacation. I'm going with
Oh,
my girlfriend Shelley, and we every year we try to do an extended hike in the Alps, a
oh,
multi-day hike.
beautiful.
I hire a company, not my company, but another tour company that provides the hotel and what's called a Sherpa service to take our bag to the
Yep.
next hotel. And then we hike all day long to get to that next hotel and have a beautiful dinner. And the next day, hike again all day long. And we hiked around Mount Blanc. And last year we did the Brenner Oberland above Interlaken. And this year we'll be in Italy's Dolomites. And
Oh,
I'll start it
beautiful.
in Venice and I'll finish it on the Cinque Terre. And I'll be over there in about 2 weeks. And right now, in fact, when we're done with our podcast, I'm going to go take a little hike because I'm getting in shape for this thing. I'm so
I
excited about
love
it.
it. I love it. Question number 3. If someone came up to you on the street and you knew nothing about them, but they asked you where they should go on their next trip, what would you say?
Oh, I would say it doesn't matter where I think they should go. They should go where their travel dreams are taking them, and recognize that you just got to equip yourself with good information and expect yourself to travel smart, and you can turn those travel dreams into smooth and affordable reality.
Oh, that's beautiful. All right. Last question. Any travel hacks for our listeners? Booking travel, flying, whatever your best tips are.
Well, I don't really get into too many hacks. I don't do frequent flyer miles or a lot of those kind of complicated things. I just believe that if you, as I said just a moment ago, if you equip yourself with good information and expect yourself to travel smart, you will. Understand that the more understanding you bring to your sightseeing, the more you'll get out of it. That is fundamental. And the big threats or complications or challenges that we need to deal with when it comes to Europe these days is to recognize the heat and the crowds of the summer. It's getting very hot
Right.
and very crowded. So scoot your trip into shoulder season. Think carefully about moderating the heat. And I think recognize that the most important souvenir you can take home is that broader perspective. That's really what travel's all about. And it's just so exciting to realize, hey, there's 96% of humanity out there. We can get out there and get to know them and come home and help make our country a country that we can be proud of.
That is so beautiful, and what a great place to end. Rick Steves, you have given so much knowledge to so many people around the world, and to all of us right here in America. ricksteves.com. You can get all of Rick's stuff. I've used it all over the world when I travel, all over Europe when I travel. So grateful to you, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us and for being my guest today.
Thank you, Pramila. I'm a lucky guy who's found my niche. I've got 100 great colleagues and technology beyond our wildest dreams to amplify our teaching. And I want to thank you for the hard work you do. I'm so appreciative of good governance and public servants who really care. So I'm proud and thankful to be one of your constituents.
Thank you so much, Rick.